At the beginning, it wasn't about cash flow. It wasn't really about having a passion for real estate. It wasn't really anything except I figured I could find a way to leverage debt such that somebody else would be living in part of the house and paying off that mortgage for me.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 45 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
Hello and welcome to episode 31. Last week, when I was talking with Courtney Sorrell, we discussed house hacking. And that's a concept where you buy a multifamily property, you live in one of the units, and you have your tenants in the other units pay your mortgage, your utilities, and put a little bit of money in your pocket every month in cash flow. Well, today I'm going to be talking with Kevin Murphy, and Kevin has found a way using a little-known loan that has allowed him to purchase his first two-family property, put $30,000 in rehab into it, and only use $4,000, less than $4,000 out of his pocket to do it all. For those of you who are looking to get into real estate investing, or even if you're just trying to figure out ways to cut expenses, pay close attention to Kevin's story. Kevin, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
You seem to have a very interesting background and direction, so tell us about that.
Sure. It is definitely an interesting background. I'll do my best to keep it short and succinct so we can get into talking about the loan. I think that loan's great and it's really important to talk about. Lots of people will be excited to hear about it. So my name's Kevin Murphy. The beginning of my career, or the beginning of, I guess, my adult life, was an undergraduate at Grand Valley State University studying philosophy, and I fell in love with philosophy, ethics, the philosophy of religion, free will, and moral responsibility. And I immediately went on to Western and did a master's degree in philosophy as well, studying the same things and teaching biomedical ethics at the university level for 2 years. And then from there, as I was finishing up that master's degree, it was great. I loved being in front of people. I loved being in front of students, working with them. However, I knew that there was something a little bit more that I wanted to get into, and I was very business-minded. I was kind of smitten with entrepreneurship as well. So I decided to come back to Grand Valley and do an MBA degree. And I did that, finished up last year, and as I finished up and found my now full-time job, I decided that I wanted to look toward starting to invest, but also chase a little bit of that entrepreneurial passion and kind of figure out how I was going to carve out my niche in the world. And so I did that, and I am currently creating my own company as a public speaker, motivational speaker, and business coach, but also as an investor. And I created a website, created a name, all of that stuff. It's kcorey and kcorey.com. And so now I'm starting to get into kind of building that part of my life.
Spell that out for us, kcorey.
Capital K, capital C, OREY.com.
So you have an entrepreneurial spirit, you have an MBA. How long ago was it that you actually graduated?
I graduated with the MBA at the last August, so it was about a year ago now.
You got the real estate bug somehow. You decided, hey, I'm going to buy a duplex and live in one side and rent out the other side. What gave you that idea?
Yeah, so it's interesting because now as I'm getting more interested in doing some of the professional coaching and some of the motivational speaking and stuff like that, finding all of these resources that talk about making your money work for you and how that can be so important when you're trying to create wealth and financial freedom. But at the beginning, to be completely honest, what it really was is I looked at rent and the rent that I was paying every month, and it just seemed to me like I was throwing money away. It seemed like I was making this money, giving it up as rent, and it just wasn't doing anything for me. And this was before I read any of the stuff about kind of creating wealth for yourself. But I really just decided if I can buy a place, if I can find a way to leverage that debt, then I can just have somebody else pay for my mortgage and I'll live for free. And so at the beginning, it wasn't about cash flow. It wasn't really about having a passion for real estate. It wasn't really anything except I figured I could find somebody else or find a way to leverage debt such that somebody else would be living in part of the house and paying off that mortgage for me.
What were you paying in rent and what were you getting for that?
I was over a little bit outside of Grand Rapids, so it was kind of a drive for me to get to both schools as well as the job that I was currently working at. And I was paying about $500 a month plus utilities for a small 2-bedroom, and it was okay. There was nothing particularly wrong with it.
Did you have a roommate as well? Or
I did, yeah. It was a 2-bedroom, and so...
And you were each paying $500?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And it was one of my friends that was from the MBA program, and so both paying $500, and it just kind of seemed like there was a better way that I could be doing it.
Mm-hmm. Now, was this student housing where you were each paying for the bedroom, or was it $1,000 a month and you were just splitting the rent?
Yeah, it was $1,000 a month. We were splitting the rent, and for what it's worth, it was over at 28th and Beltline, kind of back there.
Okay. So skip ahead.
Sure.
And we'll come back to it, but skip ahead to now,
Yep.
where you actually have a duplex. You're living in one side.
That's right.
You have a tenant living in the other side.
That's right.
What do the finances look like now?
Yeah, so now, and it's upper and lower just so that you can kind of picture it, but the people that are upstairs, so that's separate, I'm not living in that one, they are paying $900 a month plus utilities, which that itself will cover the mortgage. And then that same roommate who was kind of along for the ride, and he is in the bottom half with me. And to be fair, the bottom half is a 3-bedroom, and one of those bedrooms isn't occupied. And he pays reduced rent. He pays a couple $100s a month, and then utilities as well. So just from that, it covers the mortgage. It gives me a little bit of cash flow. All the utilities are covered, and everything's pretty much set. However, as I'm kind of investigating this a little bit more, being competitive with that bottom half, if I were to rent out that 3-bedroom because of the condition that it's in and the location that it's in, that should be bringing in somewhere between $1,200 and $1,400 a month. So when I can, the idea is that I'll be getting out of there, renting that one out, and hopefully be moving on to another similar sort of project.
What a great process. I mean, that's such a great strategy. And really, you went from renting and paying $500 a month for a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom home to owning your own duplex and actually getting paid to live there, because the rent you're getting from your roommate and the people upstairs is paying your mortgage, paying the utilities, giving you a couple $100s a month in cash flow to go out and do whatever you want. So a lot of people, they spend maybe a third of their income every month on rent or living, or mortgage or whatever. You don't even have that expense. So really, you're putting a lot more than the $200 a month in your pocket, because you've eliminated those expenses altogether.
Exactly. And that's kind of the thing that gave me the real estate bug, is when that clicked, when that light bulb went on, and I realized that not only am I saving that money that I would have been spending on rent, but also creating cash flow, then immediately the question was, why not do this again? And with that extra money that I'm saving and the extra money coming in, that pretty quickly covers another down payment for another one of these projects, and I could move forward that way. And it seems like, not that it's all rainbows, there are certainly challenges that come along with it, and it's been a lot of work, but it seems like such a great way to be able to start creating another avenue to have cash flow or some passive income. And I use passive loosely because, like I said, it's a lot of work, but once you get things going, then it slows down a little bit.
So let's go back now and talk about how you did it. So you got out of college, and we know what your thought process was. It made a lot of sense to buy a duplex, live in one side, but you also got familiar with a certain type of HUD loan that helped you do it. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that loan and what it allowed you to do with this duplex.
Yeah, certainly. And to be fair, it's the way that the process worked wasn't me going out and doing a bunch of research and finding the best way to get a duplex. Instead, it was I just kind of started asking questions, and I started asking people that I knew if they knew a good realtor. And then I would just call up the realtor and say, hey, this is the situation that I'm in. This is what I'd like to do. What sorts of things can we investigate? And really the way that it was at the beginning is we were going to try to do an FHA loan because they're a little bit lower down payment, a little bit, it seemed like a little bit more feasible at the time.
Can you talk about an FHA loan and how it works?
Yeah, and the way that I understand that those work is they are insured loans, and so that they relieve a little bit of the risk from the mortgage company or from the lender. And because of that, the lender can be a little bit more free to give somebody that, I don't think it's just first-time home buyers, but people that maybe can't put down a larger down payment or whatever. So
it makes it
oftentimes-
easier for people to buy a home because they have to put less down.
Yeah, exactly. Oftentimes you've got to put down 20%. And at that time, before I had, really started trying to save up money or anything like that, it was just, I wanted to try to acquire a mortgage without having to put too much money down. And so it was just sort of broadly, I'm going to look at an FHA loan.
Okay. So talk about that. What you were making some phone calls to realtors. Where did you end up?
Yeah, and ended up going through a friend from the MBA program who referred me to Ernesto Rodriguez, who is the one that I've been continuing to use, and he's absolutely awesome. It's been a blessing to be able to work with him the whole way because he is experienced in all of this rental stuff. So anytime that I've had an issue, even I think there was last week, it was I wanted to find somebody to come out and take a look at the gas line going into the dryer, and so call up Ernesto. Hey, do you have a guy for this? Do you know who I should call? And he's been just absolutely amazing. So had to give a little shout out to him. But basically the way that it worked was we just kind of started looking at houses, and I started going out and trying to find a lender that was going to pre-approve me. And we were just, let's kind of dive in and figure this out as we go. And we did so, and it was wildly discouraging when we started looking at houses in duplex. I think the first 5 or 6 that we looked at were just a nightmare. And maybe you've seen this, maybe you haven't, but some of the duplexes that are in Grand Rapids, something funky going on with them because they're just crazy overpriced, especially for the condition that they're in, even though they're in a pretty good location. So maybe they're thinking that they're going to get somebody that has a lot of money to put into it and just wants that location pretty badly. So the first few that we looked at, it was really discouraging. And then actually found one that I liked, and I had been pre-approved at this point, and we were going to move forward and make an offer. But we knew that we were going to offer pretty low. The place had been on the market for a long time, months and months type long time. It definitely needed some obvious work. And so we thought, okay, we'll offer a little bit lower. And so to paint a little picture for you, it was listed at $125,900. And I think we offered like $110,000 or a little under $110,000, thinking that based off of the repairs that needed to be done, the obvious stuff that needed to be done, and how long it had been on the market, that maybe they'd work with us a little bit. And so they came back and counteroffered at $125,900, which that's not me misspeaking. They counteroffered the exact same price that it was listed at.
Uh-huh.
And so I ended up coming up halfway, and they counteroffered with $125,900 again. So
that's why it had been on the market for so long.
Probably. Mm-hmm. And so that was pretty discouraging as well. So we walked away from that one, but at one point he kind of pulled me aside and he was just like, Kevin, I go through this all the time. There's people that it takes them forever to find a place that they like, but once we find one, I think it'll work out. So the following Saturday, we went out to look at some houses, and he pulled me aside and he was like, there's this other one. Now, it doesn't fit your criteria that you want, because at the time I wanted at least 2 bedrooms in the duplex. He was like, it's a 1 bedroom and a 2 bedroom, so it doesn't fit the criteria that you want, but I really think you should go take a look at it. So we took a look at it, and the place was incredible. It needed some obvious work, and some serious obvious work. It had, on the outside of it had the faux brick, like shingle feeling material, and that stuff was crumbling and peeling and stuff like that. But you walk inside and it was huge and has these wood floors and high ceilings and tons of character, and the house was just incredible. So I walk in, fall in love with it, but there's these obvious issues. So the first thing I say is, what did you get me into? Getting me over here to look at this house that didn't even meet my criteria, and I fall in love with it. But it had new windows, but the windows had been, likely they had gotten a deal on them and had somebody that wasn't a professional install them because they weren't sealed properly. Mm-hmm. There was water damage under almost every window, all the way through the drywall, all the way through some of the molding. Everything kind of needed work. And then on the outside, all of that faux brick had to be replaced. It has cedar up at the top, cedar shake, And that stuff was in decent condition, but it was this horrible yellow burgundy mixture. The trim was burgundy and the cedar shake was yellow itself. And, moving through the house, there was just stuff that needed to be fixed. There was a few cupboard doors that were falling off. And the electrical was outdated. So it had separate electrical for the upper and lower unit, but it was outdated. It needed to be upgraded in order to meet certain regulations. So we kind of walked out that day, and I'm feeling discouraged yet again. But I posed the question again. The best thing that I ever did was just kind of say, hey, can I do this, and how can I do it? And that's what I said to Ernesto was, is there any way that we can get some money and roll that into my mortgage? I don't have the money laying around to put into this place.
What did you estimate at that point, just ballparking it, what it would cost to fix it up?
I thought that it needed, $20,000 of work. And that was me being completely inexperienced in knowing what siding costs or what it costs to redo drywall or anything like that.
Sure, but you made a ballpark estimate.
I thought
about $20,000,
$20,000 ish, and we'll get this place into living condition so that I can rent it out.
And your first thought was, well, I don't have $20,000, so I can't buy this place.
Exactly.
But then you asked the question, well, how can I buy this place?
Yeah, exactly.
And so what did Ernesto say?
He kind of looked at me like, well, I don't know. And then he said, you know what? I've heard of people doing something like that where they'll take out a loan, but also roll a piece of or a chunk of extra money into the loan and immediately put that into the house. Let me make some calls. Let me see what I can do. And so he called. I think he had some kind of connection, somebody in his network that knew. And so he called them and said, hey, what can I do? And he got connected with Josh Smith of the Front Porch Group, who is in Grand Rapids, and all they do is this FHA 203K loan. And
the FHA 203K loan.
That's right.
Okay. And that's the loan that we're talking about.
That's today. The loan that we're talking about. That's the one that made all of this possible for me.
Now, is Front Porch Group, are they a lender, a construction company?
They are the contractor.
The contractor, okay.
Yep. And so you've got to be, I think they call it certified. You've got to be a certified 203K contractor in order to work with these loans. And so they are. I got connected with them, and so we started moving forward. And so the next step was to get the contractor out to the house and walk through it together. Now, with the 203K loan, what's pretty cool about it is they've got two different the way that I look at it, two different sets of improvements that need to be made or that can be made. And that's the stuff that needs to be done in order for it to meet the FHA requirements. And that's one of the reasons you need this contractor, because you're going to find an expert that knows exactly what needs to be done. So he walked through the house, and there was things that I didn't even notice. That needs to be fixed. This needs to be done. One example is like a railing. You might not know where the railing needs to be or, how high up it needs to be, whatever their regulations are. And the railings in this particular house met the regulations, but that was an example that pops into mind for the stuff that needs to be a certain way.
Are they going off a city code, like they're bringing it up to city requirements, or they just have their own requirements?
As far as I understand, it's the FHA requirements itself. So it's not just the city. I think it's more stringent.
Okay, so even more stringent than like a city.
As far as I understand, yeah, and that's going to be Josh's expertise, which is what I relied on him heavily for, and he was awesome about it. But so he goes through, makes a list of the stuff that needs to be done, and then we also walked through and kind of made a list of the stuff that I wanted to be done, and together we kind of made this list. This is what needs to be done in order to get the home into the condition that we want it to be in. And then he walked away and created his quote and gives me the quote. And we take the price that we had agreed on for the house plus the quote and get the loan for that amount of money. Obviously, that's skipping ahead a little bit, but that's kind of the process, the way that it worked.
Okay, so you had a 2-tier quote. The first tier was, this is what needs to be done under the program requirements. And then the second tier is, this is what we also want to include in that as well.
Yeah, so that's perfect, because the way that it actually worked is Josh sat me down and he said, hey, here's the stuff that has to be done, and it's going to be this amount. And then also each of the things that you had requested, and each of those things were itemized. And so we actually did kind of go through and pick and choose. Well, yeah, let's go forward with this. Let's wait on this one. Let's go forward with this. And that's kind of how we came to the sum of what the contractor work was going to cost.
Okay, and at this point, had you already made an offer on the house, or were you trying to figure out, get this quote in place before you made your offer?
Yes, we had made an offer on the house and secured it under contract, provided that it met the inspection requirements, and that we had written it in somehow saying that provided that we could get the funding necessary in order to make the repairs that needed to be repaired. That's exactly right.
The loan that you needed.
We put in a couple of those contingencies.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. What were they asking, and what did you offer?
They were asking, I believe it was 96 exactly. And again, it was the same sort of thing. There was so much that needed to be done to it, and it had been on the market for quite a bit of time. And also, we looked back, and I think it had been on the market, been sold, and then come back on the market. So it looked like maybe somebody had gone through and had their inspection done, and then realized how much work really needed to be done to the house, and backed out.
Okay.
And so I offered 85, and they came back, almost either that day or the very next morning, and offered 87. And this was a much more... It felt a lot better to be working with somebody that was reasonable on the seller's side.
They at least gave a little bit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, that's fine. That sounds great. Let's do it. Let's move forward, get this signed, and see if we can move forward with the 203K portion, because you were right. This was right before we brought out the 203K contractor to take a look at the house and the repairs that needed to be done.
Okay. So you had it under contract for 87.
That's right.
And I said house earlier, but it was
it's a multifamily house.
Multifamily house.
Yeah.
1 bedroom upstairs.
At the time, one bedroom upstairs and 2 bedrooms downstairs. That's right.
So you had the front porch group. You had the quote. Now you need to go to the lender and get their quote.
That's right.
Where did you go, and how did that process work out for you?
So when I first met Josh from the front porch group, he's the contractor that we were using. He told me, he shook my hand and he said, Kevin, I get it. You've got some lenders you want to work with. At the time, there had been somebody that was kind of a family friend that we wanted to work with. And he said, I get it, but with these loans, they're a nightmare. You want to go with somebody that's experienced in these loans, because it's really tricky to go back and forth with the two different quotes, and with the fact that they've got to, now it's not just seller and buyer, it's seller, buyer, and contractor, and that adds a whole nother element to the difficulty of what we're trying to do here. And he said, you can choose whoever you want, but I strongly suggest you go through this lender that we're working with. And so at first we thought, okay, if this is what Josh says, then we'll give that a shot. And so we tried to go through that lender, but ran into some issues with my student loans at the time. They were currently in the process of being consolidated, but hadn't been consolidated yet. And so I didn't have a monthly payment that I was able to kind of show or prove to the lender. And because of that, they had to take my student loans into consideration for my debt to income ratio. And because of that, it excluded me from eligibility for this particular loan. So at that point, it was, well, Josh, I hear you, and I appreciate that you wanted me to go through this lender, but it's not going to work out. Let me see if I can find one that it will work out with. Maybe they can work with me on the way that my student loans are laid out, or whatever. And so we went forward and we found a lender that was able to work with that based off of a student loan estimation. So we found, when we were going through the consolidation process, we had an estimation of what my monthly payment would be. And this particular lender was able to take that into consideration.
So even though you weren't making that monthly payment yet,
exactly,
they were able to run their numbers as if that was going to be a monthly expense.
That's exactly right. So usually the way that it worked for me is they wanted a proof of a couple of monthly payments to the student loan so that you could show exactly what you're paying. This particular lender, they said, well, if you can get the people that are going to consolidate the loan to write us a letter of what your estimated loan amount is, then we can take that into consideration instead.
Seems like a reasonable way of handling it.
It does.
As opposed to just excluding you entirely because you hadn't started that process yet.
Yeah, and I was very grateful that we were able to move forward. At the time, I was grateful. It turned out that mortgage company, while they were happy to work with me, they were inexperienced, to say the least, in the 203K loan.
Oh.
So it quickly turned into a nightmare process. And so I'm very glad that I went through that process and that I made it happen. However, I feel horrible for dragging the seller through all that we dragged them through, and basically everybody that was involved, because it was like mid to early December all the way through April once we finally closed on the loan. And there were just so many hiccups that happened in between that made it seem like, I swear, there was probably 4 or 5 different times that I was talking to my dad on the phone, and he said, Kevin, how sure are you that this is going to go through? And we were below 20% 4 or 5 different times.
What were some of the things that came up that made you think, well, this isn't going to happen?
So the mortgage company it seemed like they were dragging their feet through a lot of different things. And because they were dragging their feet, you've got this tension of the seller kind of wanting to get things to move forward. And we were kind of slow about it. And the mortgage company wasn't communicating well with the contractor. And so it seemed like I was making calls every day trying to get people to talk to each other. So one example was when the mortgage company was supposed to have somebody come out and do an appraisal. They were supposed to order their appraisal by some certain day. So the way that I remember it, the appraisal was supposed to be ordered by January 20th, which was already, it had taken a while for them to order it. And it didn't actually get ordered until like the end of February. And there was just miscommunication the whole time about what part that process was actually in. If the guy was on his way to his house to do the appraisal, or if the lender was still in the process of getting the paperwork from the contractor in order to start to process it to approve the appraisal. I mean, it was stuff like that was a nightmare to try to deal with. And
what did that even have to do with the FHA loan? I mean, that just sounds like it's normal procedure.
Yeah, so
that they had trouble with.
I think because the person that was doing the appraisal needed to know that it was going to be the way that the house is currently and the amount of work that we're going to put into it. Mm-hmm. That's the way that I understand.
After repair value
Yeah.
appraisal.
Yep.
Okay, so you just ran into all kinds of roadblocks, huh?
All kinds of miscommunication, roadblocks, and what it seemed to boil down to was the fact that procedurally, this loan is so much different than a standard loan, and maybe the mortgage company and myself didn't realize that going into it. We kind of just thought, oh, okay, maybe 1 or 2 things will be a little bit different, but we can move forward, and maybe that wasn't the case. There were a lot of things that needed to be done differently that were very unexpected.
A lot more hoops to jump through with this type of loan.
So Josh was right. That's the moral of that story. Go with a lender that's done this before.
Right, which you tried.
Right.
It sounds like you did everything you could do and ended up where you ended up.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm sure during this time, because it took so long, it took about 5 months for you to actually get this loan and close on the house. The sellers of the house must have been pretty irritated. How did you manage to keep them in the deal?
Yeah, absolutely. It was really difficult to do so. And like I said, they were irritated, and I felt bad because we were clearly the ones that were dragging our feet, or the lender was. And one of the things that we were so worried about was it was from December of this year to April of this year that we were kind of going through this process. And as springtime came along, and as you know, there's so much happening in that area. I mean, they've got a ton of new development. Grand Valley's developing over there. There's so much happening in that neighborhood that it looked like the value of the house was rising while I had it under contract for only $87,000. And that was one of the things that Ernesto and I discussed, was that between December and April, We don't think that I could have gotten the 87 in April if I would have gone into those same sellers, same house, same condition, everything the same, just 4 or 5 months later, that we could have gone in, offered 87 and actually got it under contract for that price. So that was one thing that we were pretty worried about. But it was also something that kind of, in an interesting way, worked in my favor because, obviously, numbers are just numbers until you can actually make the sale. But it looked like as soon as we closed, there was a little bit of equity in the house. So that's kind of exciting as well.
You bought the property for $87,000. How much money did you determine with your contractor that needed to go into it?
So it was just short of $30,000 once we decided all of the things that needed to be done for the FHA requirements, and then all of the things that I wanted to be done as well. So I'll give you an example of something that I wanted to be done, and that is it's an upper and a lower, but it also has a basement. And the way that the basement worked is it was a side door that came in that went, if you went left, it went into the basement. If you went straight, it just went into the bottom apartment. What I wanted was the opportunity to block that off by an external graded door in order to give both apartments keys to that outside door so that both apartments could get downstairs for both laundry and storage. So what we actually did was we got the door built, it got drywalled off, and then added an extra washer and dryer hookup and washer and dryer in the basement, and connected one of them to the upstairs electricity and one of them to the downstairs electricity because it does have separate
so you
utilities.
you added a separate set of washer and dryer, split them off so that each level had its own designated
That's right.
laundry room, huh?
That's right.
Huh.
Yeah. Well, yeah, not laundry room. They're just kind of off on the same side in the basement. But yeah, they've each got access to their own separate laundry that goes directly to their utilities, and that was huge. And that was something that was always big for me when I was renting during college. Laundry just always seemed to be an issue. There was a time at which I had to go to the laundromat, and that was annoying. There was a time that I would bring my clothes home to my parents' house. That was annoying. So I wanted it to be at least on the premises. And the upstairs apartment does have to come down and go out their side door and walk 3 feet to the side door that lets them in for the basement. But that's much better than going and putting their clothes in the car and going to the laundromat.
Much better.
So,
how are utilities split? You got split electric, split gas?
That's right.
Water, or one water bill?
One water bill. Mm-hmm. That's right.
That's typical. That's a good setup, though. So you needed about $30,000 rolled into this loan.
That's right.
That they would hand you at close, basically, or make available at close.
Yeah, it gets escrowed, and it goes into 2 different draws. And the first draw goes to the contractor almost immediately, kind of like right at the beginning of the work.
Upfront fee?
Yeah, and then the second draw was, actually, I just got an email confirmation yesterday after you and I were emailing saying that the second draw had just been received and that we were completely finished, and the whole thanks for working with us, it was a pleasure, all that stuff. So it was interesting to have that happen yesterday right before I was preparing to talk to you today.
Well, that's good timing. So basically, let's go back to the loan. You had $87,000 purchase price, $30,000 construction loan. I mean, you can call it a construction loan or what? FHA. What's the number?
Yeah, they call it a renovation loan.
Renovation loan. Okay.
So that was the portion that was allotted for the renovation.
How much money did you put down on this loan?
I put down, so when we made the offer that you've got your down payment in earnest, or whatever you call that, and that was $1,000. When I actually went to signing, my check was for $3,200 and some change. So it was less than $5,000 total that I put down because it was 3.5% down payment.
3.5%.
And that was all I paid. I did in the offer, so I guess I failed to mention this and I apologize, but in the offer, I did ask for seller concessions to help pay for closing costs and things of that nature. So when and they agreed, I believe it was 5%, and I believe the way that works is it's 5% off the 87 and not off of the.
Oh, so you got seller concessions.
That's
of
right.
5% off the purchase price.
That's right.
That's pretty good.
Yep.
Wow.
That was part of so that was part of that negotiation. And I asked for that when I offered the 85, and they came back and agreed to the 5%, but wanted the 87. And that was what we agreed for.
Okay.
We agreed to.
So do you have one loan then and one payment?
That's right.
And what kind of interest rate do you have on that?
It's 4.75%, and the way that I understand is, it's a little bit higher, and that was due to a couple of different factors, including the fact that my debt-to-income ratio still wasn't perfect because of the student loans, but I had pretty good credit, and so that was kind of how it shook out. But even so, it ended up being a pretty good deal for me.
Mm-hmm. And is that a 30-year fix?
That's right.
It's locked in for 30 years.
Yep.
What's your monthly payment on that?
The monthly payment is $930 and some change. So the upstairs apartment technically is a little bit short of paying the $930 because it's $900 for that one, and then so there's my roommate downstairs pays a little bit every month, a few $100s every month. I gave him reduced rent just kind of because of a couple different reasons, not the least of which is I'm still working on that bottom apartment. I got that top one done immediately because I wanted to get tenants in there to start paying for the mortgage. And then the bottom one, it was kind of, this one's nicer and bigger, but does need a little bit more work. Let's let this one go throughout the summer. So that upstairs one, actually, my parents, my sister and her husband, and my niece and nephew came out one weekend, and we just kind of went crazy and did all the painting and did doorknobs and did shower heads and the tile and basically cleaned everything from top to bottom. My mom was able to make the stoves look like they were brand new, even though I'm pretty sure they're from like 1930, and it looked amazing by the time that we were finished. And so huge thank you to them, of course. And we were able to pretty much get that one done in about a week and get some tenants in there almost immediately. So I never actually made a payment on the house. I had tenants in there before my first mortgage payment was due.
Wow.
And then moved into the bottom, like I said, and have been working on the bottom ever since. I've got another, so the third, what will be room, needs to be painted. And then some French doors will be put on that one. And then the larger living room needs to be painted. And then I will call it done. And as anybody that's ever bought a house probably knows, you call it done when you just, when you're ready to just put a list up saying, well, this stuff needs to eventually be finished, but the stuff that was pressing is done for now. So that's kind of where I stand right now.
Great. That's fantastic. Let's go over the numbers again. So your monthly mortgage is 900 and what?
30.
930.
Yep.
You're renting out the upstairs for how much?
900.
900.
Yep.
You're renting out the room to your roommate for
300.
300.
Yep.
So that gives you about $270, but then utilities are coming out of that.
Everybody
your
pays
paying for
utilities. Yep.
What about water? Are you paying water, or is your roommate paying water?
He just pays a portion of it.
He pays a portion. So you do pay a little bit of water.
Yep.
But still, even after water, you're probably still putting about $200 in your pocket every month.
Absolutely.
And the money that you have into this deal from the very beginning is what, about $3,500?
Well, so it was $3,200 plus the $1,000 in earnest that went down. So it was $4,200-ish.
So $4,200-ish. If you're putting $200 in your pocket every month, that's a two-year payback. I mean, you'll within 2 years, you'll basically not have any money into this property, and you'll be living there
certainly
for free.
Well, by then I'll be in a new one, but yes, certainly. And the most important thing I think to consider is that's with the roommate downstairs paying a dramatically reduced rent, because the bedrooms are larger and the place is larger downstairs, so it should probably be $450 at least in the location that it's at. And we've got an extra vacant room down there that's not being rented out, and the room that I'm in. So like we had talked about, once I'm out of there and renting it out, it should be, I plan on posting it for somewhere between $1,200 to $1,400, and I don't expect to have any issues getting that filled.
So that's an important thing to just kind of think about for a moment here, because if you move out and go do this again somewhere else, this property that you basically have $4,200 in will be giving you an income of anywhere from, what'd you say, 1,200 to
12 to
1,400? 12 to 14, because your upstairs is covering your mortgage.
Yep.
Your utilities are split, so you have very little utility cost. I guess you're going to have taxes and insurance and all that, but really you're putting up, $1,000 to $1,200 a month in your pocket.
Certainly,
Once
even
you move
after
out and
the
rent something
taxes,
out.
the insurance, even after all that stuff, I still expect it to be $1,000 per month. That kind of just goes away into my pocket. So that's a 4-month payback.
What a great way to to begin your investing career. I mean, I call that a grand slam right there.
I totally agree, but I owe that all to Ernesto being awesome, Josh Smith at the Front Porch Group, my whole family coming out and being so helpful. I was blessed to be able to find the opportunity the way that I did and go through, even though it was so rocky to close the mortgage. It was an amazing experience, and now I do have the bug. So, like I said before, it didn't start out that way, but it's definitely there now. So,
well, yeah, and I think if you look at what you just said, you had a team. You didn't do it by yourself.
That's right.
You had a team that helped you, that knew what they were doing, or at least knew how to point you in the right direction, helped you make it happen. There were many points where you could have just thrown up your arms and said, "This is never going to work," but you stuck with it. The payoff is huge for going through that aggravation, and you're going to do it again.
That's right.
So let's talk about that. Obviously there's probably some sort of rule where you have to live in the place for a year.
That's right.
So after a year,
Hit the nail on the head.
you're going to go back out there and find the next one, or what's your plan?
Unless I can refinance out of it more quickly than that. Just a potential
so you
opportunity. So I did
refinance
this.
out of that loan.
I did the
Okay.
same thing. I followed suit. I just started asking questions again. I called Josh. Actually, it was probably 2.5 months ago already. I called Josh and said, "Hey, I barely had to put anything down for this house. Why can't I just do this again, or do it 3 more times right now?" And the answer is because you've got to be. It's a homestead. And that's the way that the FHA gives these 203K loans. It's a homestead for a 1 to 4 unit, and you've got to be in it for at least a year. So that's the way that it stands right now. So I am ready to move on to another investment, and I'm not sure whether that's going to be waiting that year and then moving on to another possible FHA 203K loan, or if there's a way that you can refinance and get out of it, or if there's just kind of a way for me to do a conventional now, because all of the debt to income ratio now does work. One thing that's worth mentioning is lots of the mortgage companies that I've talked to thus far want a year or 2 years of proven rent income in order to take that as part of your debt to income ratio. So even though I'm not paying a thing on this house right now and I'm taking in some cash flow, they want some history behind that to show that you've really got those renters. So that's another hurdle that I'll have to overcome. But I don't foresee it being much longer before there's another property.
Great. And to recap this 203K FHA loan, the benefit of it is, it seems to me the benefit is very low down payment.
That's right.
You said 5% down payment.
3.5%.
3.5% down payment. The ability to roll in your renovation costs up to a certain amount. I mean, you were able to roll in $30,000. Is there a limit to that?
As I was reading over it again yesterday, I believe there was a limit, but it's high. Mm-hmm. It's very high.
So you can accomplish quite a bit with that.
Absolutely.
And then the interest rate seems pretty good for
it's not terrible.
It's not terrible considering how little you actually had to put down.
Right.
I mean, at 4.75 historically, that's super low.
Sure.
So you can't argue with that. Am I forgetting anything as far as the benefits of this loan?
I don't think so. The way that I looked at it is it's just huge, because you find these houses just like the way the one that I described was, and that is just, it had a ton of potential, but it needed some clear work. And just if it was like, if I could just get the house re-sided and just fix this water damage, then this would just be such a gem, such a diamond in the rough. And this loan really is a way to be able to do that. Not many of us have $30,000 laying around just ready to put it into a house immediately. But we knew what the house would be worth once we put that money in. And yeah, it's just an incredible way to do it. I don't see any reason not to.
And what advice would you give to people who are in your position, or the position you were in, getting out of college, not having much money, but realizing the benefits of home ownership and owning rental property at the same time? Where would you advise them to start?
Sure. Yeah, that's a perfect question, because it's funny. I've had lots of my friends that are my age or had similar experiences that will look and say, what are you doing buying a house already? How are you ready for that? You were only working for, your actual full-time job out of school for a few months before you decided to buy a house. And I looked back at them and thought they were crazy to not be making their money work for them in such a way. So assuming that you can't do something is a death wish, right? And I just did the opposite. I assumed that there was a way and just figured you've got to find what that way is, and started asking questions. So that would be the first thing, is just there's always a way to figure something out. Start asking questions, start building your team like I did. And then the next one would be, if you're going to, specifically for the 203K loan, if you're going to do it, then work with people that are really good. And I mean, Josh is really good. I know that. And now moving forward, if I were to do it again, then I'll be using somebody that Josh has a relationship with as the lender, because that really was a nightmare. It was excruciating, not only because of how much work it created, but I really did feel horrible about dragging the sellers through such a long, excruciating process. And everybody else that was involved. Ernesto was great about it too. I felt so bad, but he was the point man for so many frustrated emails, to say the least. So I would use a lender that is good, that's familiar with the process. And the last thing is, and this is something that we didn't really touch on, but there was a period of a couple of days where my family and I were working on that upstairs apartment. And again, they were just so amazing about the whole process. But I found myself getting really frustrated and really irritated, because there were certain things that I wanted to finish that just weren't going right. Or at one point, I was walking through and I spilled a gallon of primer on the wood floor. It was everywhere. And so there were a few different times where I got frustrated. And I think it was my mom was able to kind of calm me down a little bit and say, hey, isn't this fun? Like, look at what you're doing. You wouldn't have thought a year ago that you'd be able to do something like this. So the last thing is just having fun during the process, because that switching the mindset over to fun makes everything it puts everything into perspective, and made it a lot easier to move forward through some of the painting and stuff like that was a little bit treacherous. So that's what I've got looking back on it.
Well, that's good. It looks like my bus just arrived.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kevin, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I think you definitely shared a program with people out there that hopefully people who are listening to this will take advantage of this loan. I mean, it just sounds like a fantastic way to go.
Sure, it was great. I don't want anybody to steal the properties that I'm looking at if they're planning on doing one of these loans, but I absolutely encourage you. And if anybody ever has any questions for me, there's a way to communicate with me through the website as well. But I really appreciate being on today. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, and why don't you, before we go, why don't you just go ahead and give your website one more time?
Yeah, so it's kcorey.com, capital K, capital COREY.com.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Kevin, and good luck to you.
Thanks, Brian.
So before we go, I want to take a moment and talk about the Rental Property Owners Association. And if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that a lot of the guests that I've had on this show are members. And as a member myself, I can tell you that the RPOA provides a lot of value, not just to me, but to all Michigan rental property owners and real estate investors. And right now, they are offering a 50% discount on first-time memberships by calling this number, 616-454-3385. And you can call that number Monday through Friday, and if you mention this podcast, you'll get a 50% discount on a first-time membership. And once again, that number is 616-454-3385.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.